All right, today we're going to be detectives, Talmudic detectives. We're going to crack open just one single, fascinating case from this ancient text to really get a feel for its incredible logic. And our big mystery? Believe it or not, it all comes down to what happens when someone spills a little bit of water. I know, it sounds kind of trivial, right? Spilling water? But this one simple question is actually the key that unlocks a brilliant intellectual puzzle. We're about to see how, in the world of the Talmud, the context of an action can turn something simple into this huge, profound debate about law and even history. Okay, before we really dive in, there's one key word we absolutely need to know: libation. Now, this isn't just, pouring a drink. A libation is a ritual pouring, an offering of a liquid like water or wine, usually at an altar. You're going to want to keep that word in your back pocket because it is right at the heart of this entire mystery. So here's the game plan. We'll start with the puzzle, dig into why the sages disagreed, find a major clue in a parallel case with wine, see how that uncovers a massive historical debate, test our skills on one last puzzle, and then we'll wrap it all up.
All right, let's jump right into our first piece of evidence. I want you to picture the scene. We're at the ancient temple. It's the festival of Sukkot, and the whole issue revolves around a very special water offering.
Now, check out the difference between these two opinions. It's subtle, but it's absolutely crucial. On one hand, the sages say just pouring the water outside the temple, that's the problem. But then Rabbi Elazar comes in and adds this one little condition. He says, no, you're only liable if you first filled the vessel with the specific intent for the offering. So why? Why does that tiny little detail, the act of filling versus just pouring, matter so much? And that question, that's exactly where the real Talmudic investigation kicks off. We're shifting gears now, moving past the what and digging deep into the why. What's the fundamental principle that they're really arguing about here? This is such a classic move in the Talmud. The text doesn't just hand you the answer on a silver platter. Nope. It actually asks the exact same question we're asking. And then it starts to explore all these different possible theories to try and find the root logic that separates these two opinions. And this is just a beautiful illustration of that method in action. It's like a brainstorm of logical possibilities. Maybe the disagreement is about something technical, like measurement rules. Or maybe it's connected to this huge historical question about rituals that happened way back in the desert. Or, hey, maybe the key is to see if you can even compare the rules for water to the rules for wine. Well, it turns out that last theory, the one about wine, that's our big break. That's the breakthrough clue. To figure out the water debate, the Talmud tells us to look at a nearly identical debate all about wine libations. Does this look a little familiar? It should. It's basically the exact same argument. The sages say, you pour the wine outside, you're liable. Rabbi Elazar says, hold on, not so fast. Only if it was first consecrated in a sacred vessel. And let me tell you the explanation for this disagreement, well, it's what blows this whole case wide open. So get this. The key point here is that we're not really talking about vessels or measurements anymore. The whole debate now pivots. It hinges on this massive historical question. Back in the day, was it okay to bring offerings to private, local altars, or could you only do it at the main central temple? The answer to that question, it changes everything. And just like that, we've hit the bedrock of the entire argument. It's like we've been peeling back all these layers of legal reasoning. And what do we find at the very bottom? A foundational debate about how to interpret a single verse from the Torah. This is the one. This is the verse that kicks off the laws of libations. But what does it actually mean? When it says, when you come into the land, does that mean these laws only started once they arrived? Or was it just adding a new rule to laws that were already in place? Well, two legendary sages, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, had completely different takes on this. Okay, let's break this down because it's fascinating. Rabbi Yishmael says, look, this verse is teaching a brand new rule for the public altar that starts after you enter the land. The implication? They weren't offering libations in the wilderness. But Rabbi Akiva says, no way, they were offering them in the wilderness on the public altar. So for him, this verse must be teaching something else, that now, once you're in the land, you can also offer them on private altars. You see that? Two interpretations of one line lead to two totally different versions of history. And there it is. That's the big reveal. Our simple little case about spilling water, it was just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath the surface is this monumental debate about what actually happened in the desert. Your entire position on biblical history directly determines how you rule on this tiny ritual detail centuries later. Everything is connected. Okay, so now that we've kind of got the hang of this method, connecting these small rules to massive principles, the Talmud throws one last puzzle at us. It's like a final test of our skills. And this one involves leftover blood from an offering and what looks like a major contradiction. So let's walk through this deduction together. It's pretty brilliant. Here's the puzzle. Rabbi Neḥemya makes a ruling that seems to contradict itself. How can something be considered a non-essential part of a ritual, but at the same time, performing it incorrectly is a huge offense? It doesn't make sense. The breakthrough, the key distinction, is realizing the temple had two different altars, an inner one and an outer one. And once you have that piece of information, the whole thing just clicks into place. The resolution is so elegant. The two rabbis were simply talking past each other. Rabbi Neḥemya was talking about the inner altar, where the blood was essential, but Rabbi Akiva thought he was talking about the outer altar, where it wasn't. The contradiction, it just evaporates. It was all a misunderstanding based on a lack of precision. So, wow, after that whole journey through water and wine and history and altars, what's the big takeaway here? What have we learned from our little intellectual detective story? The real lesson here isn't actually about the rules for libations. It's about developing an appreciation for this incredible system of thought. This is a world where every single detail matters, where the difference between filling and pouring can change everything. It's a system where tiny legal details are deeply connected to massive questions of history and scripture. And maybe most importantly, the goal isn't always just about finding out who's right. It's about understanding the rigorous reasoning behind every single opinion. The process, the argument itself, that's where the real value is. And that's probably the perfect place to leave it. Think about it. This entire complex intellectual structure we just walked through, it was all built just to understand a few lines of text about spilling water. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other huge worlds of history and law and logic are just lying there, right beneath the surface, waiting for us to ask the next question?